All right, seeds of democracy. We already mentioned that the word democracy was a contribution, but now we're going to talk about the real idea and the processes of democracy. So that too is a contribution. So we just mentioned at 750 BC, they were ruled by the polis. They didn't really have a united front. The only time that the Greeks ever united was during wartime. Greek armies were just average citizens. Um, they were more upper class than anything, but they needed more soldiers to protect. And so, if you're going to require more soldiers, they wanted to have more voice in the government. And so, the tyrants, who were ambitious aristocrats, they were rulers who um, seized power by using force. They went out and they colonized or settled other lands, and these revolts were led by these soldier citizens. Now, today's definition of tyrants is that it's a negative, um, oppressive leader kind of thing. In Greek times, it really wasn't that way. They were the ones that established all the red areas on this map. If it wasn't for them being ambitious and going out and colonizing and wanting to kind of have an area that they controlled, none of these other areas would have been colonized by Greece. All right, so one of those major city states was Athens, and Athens was known as a creative state. They invented a lot. They were deep thinkers. They really used their mind quite a bit. And so there were a few people that were the leaders of Athens that brought about democracy. So it didn't just boom exist. It needed kind of a process. So the first person in that process was Solon. And again, highlighted pink because there's 30 people that you need to know. He was the head of Athens government, and he used these crazy ideas saying, let's not force people into slavery just because they have debt. Starting to get equality, but not completely, because he didn't give land back to the poor that the rich had acquired, but he said, we can't force people into slavery simply because they can't pay their debts. Pisistratus was the next leader, and he was again another one of those tyrants, those ambitious aristocrats, that he did think that the next step in the process of equality was to give land back to the poor. The wealthy, of course, did not necessarily like that, and but it did start to create a little bit more equality. Later on, we'll talk about Pisistratus's contribution as far as culture, and that was that he sponsored the first drama festival. So we'll bring his name up once again. But in the evolution of democracy, it was Solon first, then it was Pisistratus, and so we'll label where Athens is, and then we'll continue about talking about other leaders. So Athens, same place that it is today. It's the capital of modern day Greece, and it's in the same location. So Athens is pretty much dead center there in your map. All right, so the third leader of Athens was Cleisthenes, and Cleisthenes created the Greek assembly. This Greek assembly was the lawmaking body. It was groups of people, 500 people, that were randomly chosen by a lottery, and any adult male citizen could be eligible to have his name put in the lottery. And it was this group of 500 people that made the laws that governed Greece. He also created an idea of ostracism. In other words, if there's a person that is personally trying to gain a lot of power and control, they're going to ostracize him. So they would banish them from Athens, usually for time periods like maybe up to 10 years. And now we use this word ostracism as if you kick out of your group, or you kind of eliminate them from your clique. It's called ostracizing. The fourth and final Athenian leader that I want you to know in the evolution of democracy is Pericles. Athens had a full direct democracy where they elected the assembly instead of using that random lottery during his rule. Now, he ruled from 461 to 429, and it was called the Age of Pericles because it was considered to be the most dazzling era of Hellenic history. And he did things like he expanded the empire after the Persian War. Things were very peaceful. We weren't really fighting. So he could focus on things like democracy. So you have Solon, Pisistratus, Cleisthenes, and Pericles. Those are the four Athenian leaders that created this direct democracy. All right, turn to page 25 in your packets, and there is a chart, and we're going to compare Athens to Sparta, two of the most well-known city-states in ancient Greece. So in Athens, the political unit was a city-state, or a polis, as all Greece was governed by. They had a direct democracy. Now the difference here is we do not have a direct democracy because next election for president, they use the electoral college, and that just means it's represented based on population. So one vote doesn't equal one vote. In a direct democracy, it does. Military power, because Athens was very close to the sea, they had a strong navy. They encouraged trade. Not only did they make things to do trading, they also wanted to get things from other people. Colonization, they wanted you to go out and settle new lands. That map I showed you earlier with all the red areas, I wanted you to make sure that you contributed to their colonization. Sports, they had gymnastics and wrestling. Wrestling was actually a class in school, so the young boys learned to wrestle. The role of the individual, they wanted you to be free, have choices, think on your own, do all those things. And cultural life, as again, they wanted you to think on your own. They wanted you to create art, drama, new political ideas, and philosophy was also encouraged. All right, so let's talk about Sparta. Sparta, again, was completely different from Athens, and they developed a city-state that was very militaristic. They ran it like a boot camp. They were settled by a group of people that were considered to be very warlike, and they were brave and courageous people, but they didn't have time to farm. So they did have slaves, and those slaves were called helots. And those were the Spartan farm laborers because all the young men were training to be a soldier. So helots is the Greek word meaning capture, which is why it would refer to slaves. So since the boys lived a boot camp life, they trained to become good warriors from the age of 7 to 21. They didn't have time for farming, and so that's why they had to have slaves do all of their farming. As I mentioned, they were brave and courageous, but they were too focused on military, so they didn't have any statues or temples or theories or epic poems at all from Sparta. So Sparta is on the Peloponnesian Peninsula. It's the southernmost dot there on the mainland of Greece. So you can kind of see where Sparta is in relation to Athens. All right, on your chart, let's go over Sparta then. It too was a city-state or polis. They had a militaristic totalitarian government. That's just big fancy words meaning it's run like a military where one person is in charge and you do what they say. Military power, unlike Athens, they had a strong army, of foot soldiers, cavalry, things on land, not so much with a navy. Trade, they only traded what they needed to trade for. They didn't make a lot of things at all in Sparta to even trade with other people, but they did need some things, so they did do a little trading. Colonization, all right, as far as sports go, they had gymnastics like Athens did, but instead of wrestling, they were trained in military exercises, calisthenics, push-ups, sit-ups, those sorts of things for good, strong military personnel. The role of the individual was not important to Sparta. You were playing a role for the city-state of Sparta. So Sparta was the most important, and then the individual was second. So they didn't want you to think on your own. They wanted you to do what you were told. And so they didn't want this individual creative thinking. And so they kind of said, no, just don't think, we'll think for you. So what you need to do is answer the questions on page 25 and turn those in to class tomorrow. And don't forget to do that extra credit as well. All right, the Persian threat. We mentioned that Troy was a location that was highly contested, and that was what started the Trojan War. But there was also the Persian Wars, and the Persian Wars were from 500 to 400 BC, and there were four battles that we're going to not only talk about but also identify on our map. The first battle was the Battle of Marathon. Runners, or when the Greeks won, they knew that they needed to announce their victory because the Persians came in under the rule of Darius the Great, and they were the ones that had the immortal army, and they had between 10,000 and 25,000 Persians that were going to try to attack them. So when they won, they sent. Okay, so the Battle of Marathon was the first of the Persian Wars, and it's also highlighted in green. We'll locate that on the map, and orange. Orange for the obvious reason that that was the invention of the marathon race, 26 miles, based upon the victory over the Persians. Second battle was at Thermopylae, and this was about 10 years after the Persians were defeated at Marathon. They gathered up more military soldiers. They had about 2 million Persians under the command of Xerxes that were going to fight the Greeks. Now, the whole battle at Thermopylae, they actually lost to the Persians, the Greeks did. However, most people are very familiar with the Battle of 300, whether it's from the book or from the movie. And in either one, it depicts that they won this particular small battle. And the illusion was that it was 300 Spartans fighting the Greeks. However, there were actually Thebians, Thespians, and other allies of Sparta as well. So there were about 300 Spartans, 900 allies, 700 Thespians, and 400 Thebians. So people from Thebes, which we'll label on our map as well, helped the Spartans to defeat the Persians at that one battle. Again, overall, they lost the Battle of Thermopylae. At this point, the Persians had defeated the Greeks, and so the Athenians in Athens fled Athens because they feared that since they lost at Thermopylae, that they were going to come to Athens and attack Athens next. So people fled Athens and went to the island of Salamis. And it was at this point where this battle became a naval battle, not an army battle. And so the Greek navy, led by the Athenian navy, because they had a stronger navy, defeated the Persians at the Battle of Salamis. And then our last battle really wasn't much of a battle at all. It was pretty much the Greeks kicking the Persians out of their territory. And so the last battle was at Plataea, and this ended the Persian Wars, and the Greeks no longer had to worry about the Persians attacking them. So let's look at your map. We're going to label the battles, and we're also going to label the city-state of Thebes. The battles are the little explosions on the map. So the first one was at Marathon, and that is north of Athens, again, northeast of Athens, 26 miles, remember. And then the next battle was up north at Thermopylae. That's the battle that they lost. And then the Persians pushed southward towards Athens. And so the Athenians fled Athens and went to this little island right here of Salamis. And so that was the next battle. Thebes, remember, that was the people that helped the Spartans at the Battle of 300. So there's Salamis. So you have Marathon, Thermopylae, the city-state of Thebes, and then Salamis. And then the last battle was at Plataea, and that was the end to the Persian Wars. All right, so after the Persian Wars, Athens became this powerhouse. They became the head of the Greek Empire, and other city-states kind of paid them money to make sure that they were going to protect them. So after this point, businesses and trade grew and they became a commercial dynasty. Any citizen could serve in public office. They no longer used this lottery system. They used a lot of money to replace the buildings and to build new ones like the Parthenon. The Parthenon was a temple built in 447 BC for Athena on the Acropolis, which means above the city. And so the Parthenon looks like this, and it's a perfect example of Greek architecture with symmetry. You can see the Acropolis is high above the city to protect Athens.